Don't close down. I have like I'm in the middle of doing an Excel file. All
Okay,
right?
yes.
Okay.
We are now on the bottom of Nun Beis Amid Aleph. And the Gemara says, Halacha Kidvarov, we paskin like Rav Gamliel Lakula. So if you have the case where there were three different minim that were soaking in vinegar at the same time, then we look at each min unto itself. And whenever it's kol l'chayim and asoda for each min, that's when it's going to be, that's when that min is going to be chayiv in biur. Trying to fix this, sorry. Okay. Anyway, so the Gemara now explains that the Tanakama of our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yoshua, and he's going to allow you to postpone biur until the very last min of these three minim that are covered together in a chavis is kol l'chaim and asod. And Rabbi Yehuda on the other hand is going to hold like Rabbi Gamliel. And it means that every single min is judged unto itself, and whenever it's kol l'chayim and asoda, that's when you chayim in biur for that min. So that is the interpretation of Rav Ashi as an alternative to Abaye and Rav Shisha that came before him of the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda. Ravina Omar biplukta dahani tanoi. Another approach to explain machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda, based on a brisa. This sign we learned in a brisa. Ochlin bitmarim, you have dates of shvius, and it's kol l'chayim and asod. In that particular location, you can continue eating from the tmarim. You're not chayiv in biur. Achichala achon shebit soar. Soar is otherwise known as ir tmarim. And that's where they got the finest dates, and the dates in that area would last the longest. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, here we turn to Daf Nun Beis Amid Beis. Ochlin al shel beis hakipin. We can continue eating the tamarim, and we're not chayiv in biur, based on the tamarim in a place called Bein Hakipin. So what's Bein Hakipin? Bein Hakipin is a normal achila of the behemoths, meaning the chayas, when they eat the tamarim that are amongst the branches of the palm tree. However, there are tamarim that are caught between the thorns, and that's called Bein Hashitzin. V'ein ochlin al Bein Hashitzin. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, we're not going to extend the time of biur as late as Bein Hashitzin, because most chayos are not going to endanger themselves by going between the thorns in order to eat the tamarim. And now we have a new interpretation, which is being offered by Ravina to the Machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. Tanakama holds that it's not considered kolu l'chaim and asodeh, and you're not chayiv biur until the last of the dates were taken away by the chayes, even Bein Hashitzin, because there will be animals, although maybe they're the minority, they will eat even the tamarim that are caught between the thorns. However, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion he's lechumra, like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, and he's going to say that as soon as the peiros Bein Hakipin that are amongst the kapos tamarim are already eaten, that's already kol l'chayim and asoda. He's already chayiv in biur, and the animals are not considered eating when it's Bein Hashitzin. So when Rabbi Yehuda quotes the phrase Omer lo tseva avelecha af ata, it means bring it from a place where you will find it Bein Hakipin. Tonight, also, we learned in the Mishnah in Shvi'is, Sholosh Arotzos Lebiur. We divide up Eretz Yisrael into three different countries as far as biur is concerned. Eretz Yisrael is divided into Yehuda, Goliel, and Eivra Yarden. So it means that when we want to determine the Shas Biur and Kol L'chaim and Asada, each country is separate. What goes on in the next country, if there are still fruits out in the fields for the Chai to eat, that's irrelevant to what goes on in this country. And every one of the Aratzos itself, says the Brisa, Sholosh Aratzos, B'chol Achas V'Achas, is subdivided into 3 Aratzos. What are these subdivisions for each one of Yehuda, Evar, Yarden, and Golil? They are Har, Emek, and Shvela. They're the mountain ranges, they're the valleys, and they're the plains. Which means that even if that specific species, although it is Kol L'chaim and Asada here in the mountain range, but you could find it still available for the animals to eat out there in the valleys or in the plains, it doesn't matter. Every single area is a separate, independent entity. And Kol L'chaim and Asada will be determined in the Harim by the Kol L'Harim, in the Amakim by the Amakim, and in the Shvela by the Shvela. So now the Mishnah asks itself a rhetorical question. The Lama Amru Sholosh Aratzos Labir. But what's this 3 Aratzos Labir? Really, in effect, there are 9 Aratzos Labir, because each one of the 3 Aratzos has its own 3 subdivisions. So why do you call it 3 Aratzos? It should be 9 Aratzos. And the Gemara answers, Sheyu ochlim b'chol achas v'achas at sheyichle ha'achron sheba. The Gemara says the following, that in each area, it's going to be separate. Now, what that means is the following. We have 2 halachas here. We have one halacha, the harim within Yehuda. Now, there are harim in Evar Yarden. There are mountain ranges in Golil. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a breakdown into independent parts for Kol L'chaim and Asada based on 2 different halachas, 2 different variables. Number one, the different subdivisions. So I don't care what's going on in the Amakim if I'm in the Harim. And number 2, based on the 3 different countries, so to speak, that make up Eretz Yisrael. So even in the mountain ranges of Golil, that's irrelevant to the mountain ranges of Yehuda, etc., etc. Minani Mili, from whence do we derive this halacha that each one of the makomos within Eretz Yehuda is a separate definition and determines Kol L'chaim and Asada, and on top to boot, each one of the Aratzos is considered separate and independent. The Torah says, with regard to Beresh Shvius, at the end of Sefer Vayikra, it says, now, why did the pasuk have to say ulevehemtecha? I mean, it would have been sufficient to say lechaya asher bi'artzecha, because, you know, just like the chayos are looking to support themselves and eat whatever they can from the field, so do the behemoths have to do the same. They have to be digging for them as onus as well. But rather, the Torah wants to make a hekesh here between behema and chaya, to teach me that kol zman shachaya ochelos min hasodeh ha'achel lebehema shebebayis. If you have domesticated animals, as long as out in the field the wild animals, the chayos, are still eating from this species, then continue to feed your behemoths in your house. But kol l'chaya asher b'sodeh, if there's no longer food out in the fields for the chayos to eat, then kol lebehemtecha min habayis. Then you have to take all those members of the same species, the same fruits of that species, that's kol l'chaya b'sodeh, and you have to take it out of your house. You can no longer feed it to your behemoths. And then u'gemiri, we have some sort of mesores from our ancestors that ein chaya shev Yehuda gedel al perish b'golil ein chaya shev b'golil gedel al perish Yehuda. if there are no peros here left of that species in Yehuda, the chaya is not going to travel all the way from Yehuda to Galil because there's a rumor that there's still fruits over there. That's already too much of a schlep for the animal, and the animal doesn't want to take any chances. And basically, the Gemara is saying that the animals, as far as searching out for food, will stay within the confines of their eretz. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, Peros sheyatzu me'eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. What's the deal if I take peros that grew in Eretz Yisrael, they have Kiddush HaShviyas, and I bring them to chutz la'aretz? And here we have a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Shimon ben Elazar. According to the Tanakama, mizbarim b'chol makom shehem. Although the peros, by virtue of their sanctity of Shvius, because they grew in Eretz Yisrael, achayiv in biur, I can do the biur anywhere on the face of the earth. The Gidol HaPri was in Eretz Yisrael. That engenders a Kedushas Shvius and a Chiyuv biur when it's called achayiv in a soda, but I don't have to implement the biur in Eretz Yisrael. The biur is a separate din, according to Tanakama. We're not going to be matriach you to have to schlep your fruits all the way back to Eretz Yisrael in order to be Makayim biur. That's the sheet of the Tanakam. However, Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer Yachzu Limkoma v'Yisparu Mishum Shenemar Bi'artzecha. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, a great chumrah, you have to take your fruits back across the border into Eretz Yisrael, if they'll let you in, and you have to be Makayim in the midst of biur there, because the Torah adds the word Ba'artzecha, telling you that not only is the Kedusha Shvius engendered by Eretz Yisrael, B'artzecha, but even the biur has to be fulfilled, B'artzecha. So the Gemara asks, Kasha ha'fikte. Wait a second, we need the pasuk B'artzecha for a more basic halacha. Rav Shimon ben Elazar is not free to use that pasuk B'artzecha to teach you that you have to go back for biur into the eretz, but Kari Bey, and what do we need? We have from the word B'artzecha, we derive the very basic halacha that kolu B'artzecha, that even if there are fruits of that min still growing in Galil, they stop growing. They're not available for the chaya here in Yehuda, and therefore there's a chiyuv biur that we derive from B'artzecha, because we divide up Eretz into three Aratzos. So the Gemara answers that sometimes you can derive two drushos from one word. How? Karibe bi'eretz bi'artzecha. The Torah could have said bi'eretz. That would have already taught me the halacha that we divide up Eretz Yisrael into different aratzos. And now it says ba'artzecha. So there's an extra chaf at the end of this word. And that gives me license for another drasha. As far as biur, the mitzvah of biur has to be fulfilled in Eretz Yisrael. Inami, the Gemara offers another extra word in this pasuk that's redundant and therefore lends itself to the drasha of Shimon ben Elazar, and that is me'asher ba'artzecha. The word asher is extra. Now the Gemara tells a story about Rav Safra. Rav Safra nafik mi Eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. He carried his fruits on his donkey. In this case, he carried wine in barrels on the back of his donkey. Hava ba'dei gavra dechama de shvius, and this wine was sanctified with kedusha shvius. And he was being escorted, lavu ba'dei, by Rav Huna Breder of Ikov Rav Kana. Now these two very fine scholars, Rav Huna and Rav Kahana, were both Talmidim of the great Rabbi Avo. Amar lahu, so Rav Safra inquired, Ika d'shmiele minayim minei de Rabbi Avo, could one of you possibly have heard from your Rebbe Rabbi Avo, halacha Rav Shimon ben Elazar means I have to schlep back with my wine barrels to Eretz Yisrael for the chiyuv biur? Olo, we passing like the Tanakama, that you could be makayim the biur even in chutzarts anywhere on the face of the globe. And you ask two Jews a good question, you get two answers. And that's exactly what happened. Amalei Rav Kahana responded, Hachi Omer Rabbi Yavo, Aloch Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Sorry to tell you, my friend, but you have to go back to Eretz Yisrael because we pass the L'chumra like Rav Shimon. Amalei Rav Huna, Breder Rav Ika, Rav Huna had a different tradition of what Rabbi Yavo, the Rebbe, had said. Hachi Omer Rabbi Yavo, Ein Aloch Rav Shimon ben Elazar. You're okay, good to go. Wherever you are in the face of the globe, that's where you be Mekayim the mitzvah of biur. Now Rav Safra has to decide whether to accept Rav Kahana l'chumra or Rav Huna l'kula. So what does he say? He says the following: Rav Safra nekod hai klola. You should accept the following klal: the Rav Huna biyodcha. That whenever Rav Huna has a version of what he heard from Avo, that's the reliable version. Rely on Rav Huna. And therefore, Ein Halach Gerushiv ben Elazar, and I don't have to go back to Eretz Yisrael with my wine barrels. Now, why do I prefer Rav Huna over Rav Kahana? Because he was very meticulous, very careful about passing the tradition and the transmission that he accepted and received from Rabbi Avo to the next generation. He was very, very careful about it. It's like they say about Reb Baruch Ber, if you ever heard of him. He was an outstanding disciple, the outstanding disciple of Reb Chaim Brisker. They say when he said over Reb Chaim's Torah, he would pick up his pants exactly where, in the middle of Shia, where his Rebbe Reb Chaim would pick up his pants. And Rav Safra gives an example of a Talmud by the name of Rechava, who was very careful. He came from the city of Pumbedisa, very careful to say things exactly so that the transmission would be perfect and reliable. The Omer Rechava, Omer Rav Yehuda Arabayas Stav Kaful Haya, Stav Lifnim Mistav. So he tells us that on the outer boundaries of the Harabayas, there were rows of benches, one row and on the outside, and then another row next to it on the inside. These were benches that had a roof over them to protect you from the rains and other, storms, etc., etc. So that people would find it comfortable. It's like, the bus stops over here. Sometimes you get caught in the rain, you run to a bus stop. So these were the benches and the rows of benches. Now it's interesting because there's a lack of clarity here as to which Rav Yehuda actually said this. It says Amar Rebbe Yehuda. He said in a way that it could refer either to Rav Yehuda the Amora or to Rav Yehuda Nasi who came before him. In any event, Rachava was very, very meticulous about the way he passed it on. And the same thing says Rav Safra, I am going to apply to Rav Huna, and therefore I would rely on Rav Huna's transmission rather than Rav Kahana. Now, Rav Yosef was not happy about this story. And Koryale Rav Yosef quoted a pasuk in Hosea in order to describe what Rav Safra was doing. He's sort of like implying a critique that Rav Safra chose Lakula. And the pasuk says, Ami b'etzo yish'al u'maklo yagid lo. Now the word maklo here literally means a stick. And Hosea Novi is castigating the people because they worship, things that are inanimate objects. And if we take the word makel and we, as a homonym, we reinterpret the word makel, it means call on mekelo, magidlo. He's going to accept the Haggadah of the one who's Mekil, as if to say, he had vested interest in accepting the tradition of Rav Huna. Rav Eloi cuts be Panyasa the Shvius, Kafniyasa. Again, I'm trying to hold this Gemara on my hand, so it's a little. Kafniyasa is a date tree that's very immature. In other words, it's early and the dates on the tree are very small, very young and immature. And therefore Rav Eloi took the license of cutting down the tree. Who was that? George Washington? Or no, it was Abe Lincoln. Anyway, so he cut down the tree, and the Gemara objects, how could Rav Eloi allow himself the permission to cut down a tree? On this tree, which is Kafnios, there are fruits that are growing there, albeit in a very early and mature stage, but they have Kedusha Shvius. And the Torah says, V'haisa Shabbos ha'aretz lachem li'achla, that the Peres and Shvius have to be eaten. Amar Achmana, what is the Torah emphasizing? Li'achla v'lo lehefsed, you're not allowed to destroy Peres of Shvius. How could he do such a thing? The Chitem, and if you'll tell me, Hani Mili, Heicha Dinachis Lepera, maybe when does the Torah say that you're not allowed to destroy Peros of Shvius li'achla v'lo lehefsed? That's only when it has a Shem Pri. And a Shem Pri is only in a later stage when it's much more mature and developed. So the Gemara now is about to embark upon an analysis of Kedusha Shvius and a Shem Peri. When is it called Peros, such that the Kedusha Shvius is Chal? Because at some point it's still part of the eights. There's no Kedusha Shvius in the eights. The Kedusha Shvius is in the Peros. So what point did it mature such that now it's endowed with Kedusha Shvius and you're not allowed to destroy it? Maybe the reason why Rav Eloi chopped down this Kafnaisa tree is because the Peres did not develop to the point where they had a Shem Pri. So the Gemara rejects that. Why? Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Baravo, Hani Maschale di Orla. Now the Gemara is assuming an unquestionable analogy between Orla, where the Isser is dependent on the Shem Pri, and Shvius, where the Kedusha depends upon the Shem Pri. And with regard to Orla, Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Baravo that Maschale. Now, Maschale di Orla, we're talking about a certain covering over the dates. And that covering falls off when the dates mature. It protects the date. God in nature and his divine wisdom saw to it that there would be some shaft, some covering, a klipa that would cover and protect the Tamarim. And he says, Asirit. It's already at that early stage, also Mishum Orla, and even these klipos, which he calls Maschale, are endowed with the Isser of Orla. They also have a Shem Pri. So he's telling me now, Rav Nachman, two chidushim in Hilchas Orla. Number one, we're at a very early stage, and that's why the Aschale are still attached to the date. They'll fall off as soon as the date begins to mature. It still is also midin Orla. It has a Shem Pri. And number two, another chiddush he's telling me that even the Aschale themselves are also b'toras Orla, which means they're also no, you can't even use them for fuel. And that's the halacha called Shomer Pri Kipri. Any part of the vegetation that protects the fruit itself is also endowed with the same status as a Pri. Hol v'nasu Shomer Lepri, the Shomer Leperi Amos Hami. At what point in the development of the dates does the date still have this Aschale, these klipos that protect it? B'kufre. Kufre means kafnios. Kafnios, if you remember, was the state of the tree that was cut down by Rav Eloi, the kokari leperi. And yet, despite the fact that the tamarim are small and immature, nevertheless, Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabbah, insisted that they have the Isser Orla and they have the Shem Peri. Hence, how could Rav Eloi chop down the Kafnaisa tree when it has Kafnios, which are considered free? So the Gemara answers, this is really Machlokas Tanoim. Rav Nachman took the high road L'chumra. Rav Nachman the Omer Rav Yossi, but the Rabbanan never accepted Rav Yossi, and therefore Rav Eloi was falling back on the shoulders of the Rabbanan. This now we learned in the Mishnah in Orla. Rabbi Yossi Omer Smodar Asur Mipneshu Peri. Now, in the development of Peros, we have two very early stages. One is called Smodar, and the other is called Bosar. I mean, if you want to remember, just make sure that the Samach comes before the base, which is just the opposite in the Aleph base, right? So if you remember it in the reverse. So Smodar is first, and then it becomes Bosar. Rabbi Yossi holds that as early as Smodar, which is the very beginning of the blossom of the date, it's already considered a peri, and therefore the Isur Ola generates with regard to Smodar. Upligi Rabbanan alei, Rabbanan hold. Now I think I made a mistake. Let me just correct one mistake. The word Smodar is used specifically with regard to grapes, which are Asur Ba'arla and have Kedusha Shvius, obviously they're Peros. And the earliest stage in the blossoming of the grapes is called Smodar. Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that Smodar is already a Shem Pri, hence it's also Ba'arla. And the Chachamim reject that. They hold that Smodar is too early. We have to wait for the next stage in the development of the Anovim, and that's called Bosa. Maskif le Rav Shimi minar doi, umi pligi rabbanan ale. Is it really so? I mean, the Mishnah only codifies the statement of Rav Yossi, and it says nothing about the Rabbanan. Now the Gemara wants to prove, Rav Shimi wants to prove that the Rabbanan accept Rav Yossi, and they would agree that with the exception of grapes and one or two other fruits, as we'll see, carobs and what else? And olives, right? So there are only three fruits in regard to which the Shem Peri is delayed, according to the Chachamim of Rav Yossi. And the Machlokas between Rav Yossi and the Chacham is about these three fruits, whereas Rav Yossi already begins the Shem Peri with Smodar. But the Chachamim never rejected the fundamental position of Rav Yossi that Smodar does generate a Shem Pri, and they only argue in three cases. And this we're going to learn based on a Machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. And we're learning now in Mishnah in Shvius. Me'emasai ein kotzen seilonos b'Shvius. When does the tree develop fruits that have a Shem Peri, and therefore you're not allowed to destroy the peros of Shvius or cut down these trees, because the Torah says li'achal v'lo lehefsed. Beit Shammai omrim kol ha'ilonos mishiyotziu. Now the word mishiyotziu indicates even an early stage in the development, even as early as Smodar, and according to Beit Shammai, that applies to all fruits. Beis Hillel disagree in three cases. Beis Hillel omrim charuvim mishe yisharshu. Yisharshu means that it's a later stage when you see it like a sharsheres. If you look carefully at Boxer, you'll see at some point there are like round circles on it. Hagfanim, and here we'll turn to Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. Mishe Yigreu. Okay, Yigreu is again a later stage in the development of the grapes beyond Smodar. And Azesim Mishe Yonetzu, when there's a certain kind of a covering, a klipa, that will develop around the olive tree. But Shar Kol Ilanos, but the balance of all of all the sorts and categories of trees, including date trees, is Mishiyotziu. Even Beis Hillel agreed to Beit Shammai that in this very early stage, which is equivalent to Smodar, it already has a Shem Peri. And Rav Shimi, who raised this question, continues and he says, V'yomer Rav Asi, Rav Asi tells us what is Mishe Yagareu with regard to grapes. It means who bosar, who gerua, who pula lavan. What's important for us is that Rav Asi identifies Mishe Yagareu, which is Beis Hillel's definition of anovim, as bosar. Smadar is not enough. We have to wait and delay the emergence of the Shem Pri and the Isur Orla, the Isur Peres Shvius, until it reaches the state of Bosar. As I said before, the base of Bosar mean it comes after Smadar. And the Gemara says, what do you mean, who pull a lavan? It's a white bean. Pull a lavan salkedaitach? When we talk about beans over here, we're talking about grapes, not beans. Ela ema ki pula lavan has the size. Shiuro ki pula lavan has the size of a small white bean. But in any event, we see clearly from Rav Asi that Mishi Goreu, as far as Gefanim is concerned, is not Smadar, but it's Bosar. It's a much later stage. Uman Shamat Leiti Omar Bosar in Smadar Lo, Rabbanan. So who's the one who would say that with regard to grapes, we have to wait until it reaches the state of Bosar or later stage, and Smadar is not enough? That's the Rabbanan. Uketani, and nevertheless it says, Sha'ar Kol Ilonis Vishiotziu. So, for example, the palm tree, the date tree, you're not allowed to cut it down. Mishi Yotziu. Yotziu means as soon as the blossoms start showing up, breaking through the branches, there's already blossoms on the tree. It's already considered dates. It already has a Shem Pri. Ella, and here we're going to stop for today. Rabbi Eloi bin Nischane cuts. Nischane. The Gemara reinterprets the whole story. Forget it. You thought that Rabbi Eloi was cutting down Shvius trees that had dates on them, and he was in effect destroying the dates. And we're saying now, Mishiotziu, that even when the dates reach that early stage of Smadar, they already have an Isur Shvius. How could he do such a thing? The answer is, you got it wrong. That's not what he cut down. He cut down the male palm trees. Now, the male palm trees develop dates that never actually mature. And the only way of making those dates edible is you cut them down from the tree, you place them into baskets that were made of branches of lulav, of palm branches, and over the course of time, they slowly mature. But that's exactly what Eloi was doing. He was cutting down the tree to remove these peros, which would never, ever mature on the tree. So therefore, he's not destroying the peros. He's only facilitating the maturation process with regard to these dates that come from the male trees, which are called nischane. And he says in Hebrew here, Dekel Zachar Sherigil Laktof is Tamaro B'Chodesh Nisan, Vatmar Shbo Enam Isbashlim Boliolam. They will never ripen on the tree. B'Nimtza Shaloif Sidam, he wasn't mafsid these peros by cutting down the tree. On the contrary, this was part and parcel of the process of maturation, of maturing these trees and making them edible. Okay, then. So now, I would first of all thank you for bearing with me. You know, there are always surprises here with regard to the internet, especially here in my house. And I don't know exactly how to close this down. It could be that one of you gentlemen has to press some sort of button. The only option that they give me is called leave meeting. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm hoping that I would still be able to start up the next meeting for the next.
And what time will we meet on Thursday?
Thursday is Rosh Chodesh. I can't be here before 7:45, I don't think. In other words, even on a regular Monday and Thursday, because this is the latest time for Hanetz on the entire calendar, that's going to change in a few days. It's going to get a little bit earlier. So now it's the latest time for Hanetz. and the davening on a regular Monday and Thursday ends at about 7:30, and we have to add Kriyas HaTorah and Musaf. So I'm going to shoot for 7:45 on Yom Chamishi. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much.